All right, I guess it's about that time, folks. It is Tuesday, May 28th, 2019, and this is the City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. Would the clerk please call the roll?
City Council members Brown.
Here.
Hazen. Hersey.
Here.
Jacobson.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Roberts.
Here.
Wu.
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Here.
All right, we'll call this meeting to order. First up, we have approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. That would be May 13th, 2019. Is there a motion for approval?
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Dennis Roberts.
Second.
Second by Mary Alice Wu. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
I didn't see any.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. All right, that motion passes. Are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, we're going to move on to public input. I've got two that want to address the council at this time, and one who wants to address the council at the time of the agenda item. First up is Carletta Donaldson. If you want to come up and speak about the fun weather we had in southeast Urbana over the weekend.
Yes. I was wondering where Mayor Marlin was going because I wanted her to hear this and not record it. No, I know. I said, where's she going? Where's she going? Okay, Carletta Donaldson. And I'm sure most of you, well, all of you are well aware, but I don't know about the listening audience, about the storm. Some people slept through it. Some people were there like the residents. As soon as it happened, my alderperson was right there on the spot talking to residents. We really appreciated that. We've had that before from our now mayor, former alderperson, when things have happened and been on this. And I hate to use the phrase Johnny on the spot, but you were Johnny on the spot, and we appreciated that in our neighborhood, so we certainly appreciated that. Later in the day, we were visited by another alderperson who I've known. Well, she's known me all of my life because she's older than me. But Ward 3, Ward 3, Alderperson Hersey. So we appreciated that as well. And then one of your employees, Bridget Buchanan, who I've known quite a long time too. And they didn't come because they knew us. They just wanted to see what was going on in other parts of the city. So our neighborhood, we truly appreciated that. Now, the Public Works, I personally can't say enough. I mean, me and my dad, and I hate to even say this, there was no damage but one piece of shingle from our house on that street, Brookins Drive. And we looked at the devastation around the neighborhood, and of course, I'm a carrier overnight, Shirt Circle, and of course, they've done the best they could so far with that, but I understand that they were trying to get people where they could, you know, get to their properties and get in and out and safely and make sure that people were safe. They did their job Sunday, Monday, today, and I'm sure it's going to continue. My only concern was when I listened to the radio this morning. Of course, Champaign has said that June 4th, if you get your things out on the curb, and again, I know we probably had more destruction than Champaign may have had and confined into the area. So one thing that our neighbors have done, and I said if Mrs. Lambert, I'm sure you remember that name on Brookins, had she been there, she would have had the whole cleanup done and then sent bills to the neighbors and said, pay me when you can. But I guess and some of them are going to go ahead and just have people, go ahead.
I will say that we've revised the plan
Okay.
and put out the notice this morning that the city Public Works folks will be picking up brush and tree debris from both private trees as well as right-of-way trees, as long as people put the material on the curb. And all the guidelines are on the city website as far as the size that we can accept. And
Okay.
it'll be through June 4th.
Okay.
Yeah, the devastation was
good.
just too
Okay.
much. So
Well,
yeah,
that's good to hear. Yes.
they'll be there.
Yeah, it was just amazing. We've been in that area for 43 years in that house. Never have I seen, even in 96, I believe it was, when the tornado went down McHenry at Philo and then over to St. Joe. I'm sure that, you know, people were, but what I saw Sunday morning when I was out on my route, I mean, it just was enough to just break my heart, you know, with the things that were going on. But again, our alderperson, and I understand you were on the street, They did let me know. I missed you. I said I must have gone in the house for a moment or something. But again, I thank all of you for whatever you did, and then that I missed out on or something. So truly appreciate it. But Urbana, the Public Works Department, and even in the work that they were doing, they took the time out to answer questions from residents. I knew that they had a job to do. We all knew that they had a job to do and other places to get to, but they weren't saying, they weren't rushing, and whatever questions the residents had, they were eager and willing to answer those. So much appreciated. And then my last thing is, and this is just an announcement in light of all of this, the American Legion Post 559 at 704 North Hickory. This Friday, May 31st, they have a salute to our veterans, and that's in conjunction with the 100-year celebration of the National American Legion. And so we will be honoring our members who are World War II vets and Korean War vets who are still living. So if anybody's available, just to stick your head in or something, just to say hi to the vets. They're in their late 80s, early 90s. And I'm proud to say that we have one of our Korean War vets who I believe is the youngest Korean War vet ever. It just happens to be my dad. He went into the service at 15 years old during the Korean War, so he'll be one of the ones that will be recognized on Friday. So again, that's Friday, May 31st. That's Friday at the American Legion, Post 559. And again, once again, I'm proud to be a resident of Urbana and Ward 7, so thank you so much.
Thanks, Carletta. Just so citizens are aware, it is branches need to be less than 8 feet in length and no more than 10 inches in diameter.
And there is a boundary to the area where we will be doing this cleanup. So it's help me out. It's Windsor, Race, Philo, and Silver Munford on the north.
Correct.
Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry. 8 feet?
No more than 8 feet long, no more than 10 inches in diameter. So larger stumps, larger pieces like that will need to be picked up separately. The city won't be taking those.
And items must be placed on the curb. Make sure you're not blocking fire hydrants, lights, vehicles, et cetera. And all the guidelines are on the city Facebook page and on the website.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Sharice, you may.
Thank you, Jared. For people who aren't in that main area that was devastated and can possibly probably have some damage or tree limbs that need to be picked up or whatever, should they just call Public Works and ask Public Works to come to their neighborhood to pick that up, or what?
If the trees that are involved are in the public right-of-way, if they were city trees, then we will come and pick that up. But if it's private, we're not hauling from outside the area that I just described.
Okay.
So if it fell in their backyard, then they would need to find their own means of disposal. But
Okay.
if it came down from a city tree in the city right-of-way, then the city will pick that up,
Okay.
as
Thank
it,
you.
as it would normally.
Okay, thank you.
Dane, did you want to say anything else about?
Well,
Public
sure, I'll
Works?
just jump in now that Carletta opened the door. I just want to echo what she said about our first responders, and Public Works employees are among our first responders, but starting about 2 in the morning, the neighbors were telling me the police were out there checking houses to make sure people were okay, firefighters came to help, and then our Public Works guys and women showed up around 2 as well and started, and they've been working straight through the weekend. And the outpouring of support from the community is really heartwarming, and it's good for them to hear that. And the devastation in our neighborhood is just hard to believe. My house was about where the tornado touched down, so it started there and went east, and it has changed the nature of the neighborhood forever. The trees that were hit hardest, and it was the trees that took the brunt of this, were the oldest, biggest trees. So there, a lot of them are gone, so you have a shade garden that's now in bright sunlight, and never in our lifetime will our yards be the same. And then fences and cars and some house damage and that sort of thing. So when people are hauling, they're living landscape to the curb, it is a part of their home that they're losing. So the support from the community has been really heartwarming. And complete strangers stopped by, helped put tarps on roofs, volunteered to help, and we will be, the city will be, as I said, picking up debris through June 4th. So things have to be out on the curb by June 4th, and we'll do the best we can to keep things moving and cleaned up.
Just one more, is the arborist in Public Works?
Arbor Division is part of Public Works. Yep. Yep.
Okay. Moving right along, Dan, you did want to speak beforehand, correct? Yes. Okay. Dan, you're up next, who has some comments about our historic district resolution coming up this evening.
Dan Maloney. I'm here in support of the establishment of the Urbana Historic District. I'm currently renovating the Cohen Building, which is at the corner of Main and Ray Street in Urbana.
Dan, could you pull the mic just a little closer to you?
Sure. I'm currently renovating the Cohen Building, which is at the corner of Main and Race in Urbana. And that project is perhaps the impetus of the development of the Historic District. But I believe the Historic District is a win-win for property owners and the city. So that's pretty much what I have to say. If anybody has any questions, but again, I think it's a great idea, and I'm really looking forward to going forward. So.
Thank you, sir. Does anybody have any questions or want to ask Dan anything? Dennis?
Just want to thank you for actually kind of initiating the whole process. I'll have some comments about it when we get to the topic, but I do appreciate your enthusiasm for making the entire downtown a district that's possible to receive the tax credits that you're interested in receiving for anybody who wants to actually improve the property.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay, thank you.
And I do have one more card from Jason Rock, but he indicated that he wanted to speak at the time of the agenda item. All right, so next we have presentations. Anybody have one that's not listed? No? Okay.
Could I do a public input moment?
Sure.
Okay.
Thanks, Dennis.
Yeah, there's one other thing I wanted to comment on. Maybe you noticed it or not, but there was a day of gratitude that was held at the Unitarian Universal Church on Thursday. And I just want to report that Mr. Abdul Hakim Salam, who was the originator of the Day of Gratitude, and he came to us 4 years ago and tried to promote it, and we acknowledged it and have been celebrating it for several years now. He announced that it is now a Day of Gratitude in the state of Illinois. He had, there's a proclamation to that effect that was presented to him, signed by John Holman, Clerk of the House of the State of Illinois, and also Michael Madigan, Speaker of the House. I've got a copy of it here. And so next year, the Day of Gratitude will be available to any community in Illinois who'd like to celebrate it.
Great. Thanks, Dennis. All right. Any staff reports? John Schneider.
Good evening. I just wanted to mention to council that the gentleman that's going to be presenting the case with the historic preservation, Marcus Ricci, has completed the rigorous process through AICP and has become a certified planner.
Congratulations. Congratulations, Marcus. Any others? Nope. Okay. Well, first up, we have resolution number 2019-05-013R. This is a resolution approving a loan agreement with the Urbana Free Library. Elizabeth Hannon is going to lead us through this one.
So as you may know, the property tax bills have been delayed this year by about a month. I believe they were supposed to be in the mail today. Because the library is so dependent on property tax revenue, it's almost 80% of their operating fund revenue, this creates a cash flow problem for them. And we would not want them to be unable to pay their employees or to pay their vendors. And so this resolution would authorize us to loan them up to $500,000 at no interest cost. That money would be dispersed biweekly. We'd review their cash flow needs and disperse it as needed, so it might not ever reach the full $500,000, with repayment to be made within 10 days after they receive their second full property tax distribution. So I think it's pretty straightforward. The cost to the city is pretty minimal, perhaps a few $1,000s in interest income that we'll lose.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Anyone have questions for Elizabeth? Or I'd entertain a motion.
I'll do that. I'd like to move resolution number 2019-05-013R, a resolution approving a loan agreement with the Urbana Free Library to the City Council for approval.
Thank you, Dennis. Second by Sharice.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. All right, that passes unanimously. All right, next up, we're going to do our pedestrian stops discussion. And Chief Serfin, I think, is going to lead us through this. I don't see Melissa.
If we don't have Melissa, it's going to be a short meeting. I was told she was backstage watching.
Perhaps she will join us shortly.
Hello, Melissa. You can let me know if she sneaks in the back
here
door.
Here she comes.
Let's watch the chief dance for a minute. And while she's coming up, I'll go ahead and hi, thank you. I'll go ahead and get started. Back in 2015, the state of Illinois passed the Police and Community Relations Act. There were a lot of different components of that act. Some of those we've studied and discussed here with regards to body cameras. One of those, another component, is the pedestrian stop study. And so what we're going to go over tonight, you may recall back in September, we began our conversation on this particular topic. And we had data from 16 and 17 and some of 18. Well, this is essentially our 2018 presentation on the data that we've collected thus far. And as the slides warm up here, we'll go through those, and I'll be able to kind of guide you through a little bit of how we've done things, how we're changing, and hopefully it'll provide a little clarity to this. Okay, so we've already covered some of the some of this background, and let's see what the. Okay, this is verbatim from the statute, and the attempt is for police to gather data on pedestrians who they stop. And one of the things that we noticed as we kind of went through and began really looking at this material last year was that indeed Urbana had just a large gross number of traffic stops, pedestrian stops. That was the last time. As we went through the material, we really felt that indeed there were some gaps in how the understanding and the definition of the terms that the statute put out and how we were defining those terms. And we were very letter of the law when we built the program at the end of 2015, moving into 16. And as we did that, we determined that as we started to look at these, why Urbana's numbers are higher, well, again, we would offer that it was because it was how we were counting, not how we were policing. So for 16, 17, and 18, you will see here that when we would report a stop to IDOT, there were essentially 4 components: that we had to have a stop of a pedestrian in a public place, and that it involved a frisk, search, summons, or arrest. And that public place is really what we thought was a big wide net. And if you may recall even how it was defined, a place of public access. So if indeed there was a shoplifter that was detained by Walmart staff and we came over and we took over that detention, our officers said, well, we've got a stop of a pedestrian in a public place, and we ultimately arrested them for shoplifting or cited them with an NTA, that would count in the data. And so that we revisited that. This I just like to show because it's completely confusing and crazy, but this sort of shows some of the decision tree that the officers are trying to go through, and we won't go through all this. I know this has been in council packets in the past, but you can see those 3 points here. In addition, you can see that the pedestrian was slightly more expanded even to include cyclists or suspicious vehicle occupants, and there were other police command and positions, and there was this different decision made. So those were the 3 points that we focused on, and we wanted to narrow this. And how do we get to that point of narrowing some of these definitions? Well, we started doing some consulting, and we had met with the CUCPJ on this particular topic, and then throughout the fall of last year in 2018, we reached back out to the Illinois Department of Transportation, and you can see some of the language in the letter that we got back. We then reached out to our local lawmakers, and we did get a response from one that you can see here. And interesting, it says contact city or county legal counsel, and when we built the first thing, we contacted our city legal counsel, and they helped us put the first thing together. And then, as you can see, no response from a couple others. We then met with either me personally or phone calls or Melissa. We met with the chiefs and our crime analysts from Champaign, Danville, Decatur, Bloomington, Normal, Peoria, Rockford. And one of the things we learned was that everyone was doing it slightly differently. And even if the policies, the verbiage on the page was the same, we would sometimes get then how the practice actually went down and what was happening. And so we really reflected on some of this. Melissa, even while having the ACLU on the phone for something else, said, hey, well, I got you on the phone. She reached out to them. And Melissa, if you want to at this point maybe speak to a little bit about what you heard.
Yeah, and so I spoke with them. They were involved in the drafting of the legislation, and I guess the first round of it was significantly more explicit on the different things that they wanted to collect information on and the definitions for that, but it wasn't going to be passed with a long verbiage. So the interest from the ACLU was to get it on the books, and then they could fix it later. That hasn't. There's not been any further clarification on what any of that means, but the legislative intent was to collect information on stops in public places, and while that wasn't clearly defined, it is now state law.
And then in addition, we had an opportunity to meet with a couple of council people.
Mary Alice?
I know that one of the big differences between all of the agencies that are collecting the data is what constitutes a public place, and I'm curious if the ACLU gave you an actual definition of what they describe as a public place.
They did not.
Okay, thank you.
I did mention that we were collecting it for Walmart, and they said, no, that's not. But there wasn't a clear definition that they had put into the law.
So, in addition, we reached out to a couple of our resident experts as well. One volunteered and one got volunteered, and so we got a chance last fall to have a little one-on-one discussion and sort of provide, and then in-house we had command folks kind of get together and kind of look at what we were doing and where we think we wanted to go. And so as we kind of got this draft and worked through this in December, our idea was to try and make sure that the data, when we had a clean break in 19, so that if we're going to change it, that's when we wanted to try and change that. So that's ultimately what we did. So as of January 1st, for a pedestrian stop for Urbana Police to report it to IDOT, there will be that stop of a pedestrian in a public place involving the first search, summons, or arrest, and we more narrowly defined that public place to be what we had felt, based on all of our research, was more the intent of the law and what they wanted to try and capture. They weren't trying to capture us doing retail theft investigations at Walmart, but when officers are out in the streets, sidewalks, alleys, bus stops, and parks. The other thing you might notice is that in pedestrian, we also took out bicyclists and the passengers of the cars, and that was getting wonky and skewing things. So this is the definition that we used. And then you will hear a term called non-reportable. And under prior police command, they wanted to have reportable and non-reportable. And reportable would be the top 4. Non-reportable would be if indeed it did not lead to a frisk, search, summons, or arrest. So if there was a stop of a pedestrian in a public place, as defined here, that data we would have. So that's kind of how our methodology changed for January 1st of 2019, and that would be reflected in here in this chart, which cleans it up just a touch. But you can see that this is our sort of guiding overview on this. And what I wanted to do now is, let's see, was there anything? Before we get into all of this, I will at least say that when we were looking through IDOT's prior studies, half of the police departments reported data. So there were some of them they reached out, then half of those, maybe a quarter, reported they didn't have any. We didn't make any pedestrian stops in a whole year. Okay, so at any rate, I just wanted to just mention that, and now I will be quiet for a moment and let Melissa take over some of this.
Okay, so we started collecting the data in 2016. 2016 was, we're considering it a pilot year. It was when in doubt, fill it out. So there was some over collecting on things that were, okay, well, this is in public view, so we're going to fill one of these out, and that's fine. We need a learning curve, and we need a process of training and quality assurance. So the data that we're interested in now is 2017 and 2018, because we're talking about all the changes that we're making for 2019. I've projected our estimates for what our pedestrian stops will be for 2019, and it's going to be significantly smaller, not because of a change in practice, but because of a change in how we're reporting it. So tonight's going to be 2017 and 2018. When we move to 2019, we're not going to be able to look backwards and compare it. It's going to start fresh with 2019. So tonight we're just going to talk about 2018.
And before you jump off of that slide real fast, I just wanted to make mention that when she said, when in doubt, fill it out, the officers, we came down and we were beating, I need you guys to fill these things out, I need you to fill them out, and it was kind of nuanced, and so they might think, well, I'm in somebody's front yard when I made the stop, does that count, does it not count? I can't get in trouble if I fill it out. So guys were filling stuff out, which means the data, I think, was a little wonky. And so now we've kind of honed in on this, and I think we're getting into a little better place. But we'll at least go with the comparison of 2017 and 2018. The comparative value moving into 2019, the statistician will explain, I guess.
Yes, so it's not 2019 is not going to be great to look at looking backwards, but we'll at least be able to have a very clear definition of what it means to be in a public place, and then that'll be what we'll use moving forward. But tonight's data presentation is really about what we've done in 2018, so for the last year, and we can compare that back to 2017 with what we did in Urbana. So the reason that we've initiated the pedestrian stops will be the first thing that we look at. It's a checkbox on a form, and you can fill out more than one. So it's not just one. It can be all of them, or it could be anything down to other only. There has to be at least one marked, but it could be any combination of them. But in most of the cases, it's fits description from a radio broadcast, which is the 911 METCAD dispatch center, or from a call for service. Proximity to the reported crime location was the second highest marked, and then fits the description of an offender as described by a victim or witness. Suspicious activity is significantly smaller, and very few actions indicative of casing a victim or location, actions indicative of engaging in a drug transaction, and 0 for gang-related enforcement. Now there's some where other only is marked, so it doesn't fit nicely in any of those boxes. I did a brief text analysis on that, and there were 5 pedestrian violations where walking against traffic or weaving in and out of cars. Being in the park after hours, open alcohol were all 5. Someone was witnessed committing a crime in 4 cases, and fit descriptions of individuals with outstanding warrants for 2018. This is for reportable. Moving to non-reportable, it's fairly similar. In most of the cases, someone fit a description from the radio broadcast. About 40% of the time, the proximity of the reported crime location was marked. 38% of the time in 2018. Fit description of an offender as described by a victim. And then down to the other only for non-reportable, More of those were pedestrian violations. Park after hours were 6, open alcohol were 7, fit description of an individual with an outstanding warrant 3. So it's just kind of a mixed bag. So if it doesn't fit nicely into one of those, I matched that into other only, and then I did a little bit additional analysis on it. But it's just the reason that the pedestrian was stopped in the first place. So we try and mash that together. So how many of these were reactive, where we were asked to respond to the scene? It was in response to a crime that was committed. There was a victim, there was a witness, there was somebody had called 911. So in 85% of the cases, one of the reactive was marked. So fit description from radio broadcast, proximity to a reported crime location, fit description of an offender as described. In 15%, one of those was not marked, and so we're calling those proactive. That includes the other only, and some of those are not quite as proactive, but it's still going to be in there. For the reportable in 2018, 5%, the only box that was marked was suspicious activity only, and 8%, the other only box was marked, and then in 1%, it was either or drug gang casing without suspicious activity. So it's just a way to try and look at it and think, were we asked to be there, or was this more of an officer-initiated stop? And in 85% of the reportable stops, it was reactive. And then the same thing for non-reportable. It's a little bit more proactive, but it's still in 77% of the cases, at least one of those first 3 boxes was marked. There's more of an other only here, and then there's more of a suspicious activity only box that was marked there. And then moving on to the demographics of reportable pedestrian stops, 2017, 2018. So in 2017, 64% of the reportable stops were conducted with African-American pedestrians. In 2018, that was 68.29%. For Caucasian pedestrians, it was 30.92% in 2017, 26% in 2018. And then Asian and Hispanic were a smaller percentage of that. And then non-reportable pedestrian stops, we're looking at 68% in 2017 were African American, 66% in 2018, 68% 2017, 66% 2018 were African American, and then 28% in 2017 Caucasian, 29% in 2018 were Caucasian. So that is not comparable to our census population because it's not a random sample of citizens in Urbana. These are in response to crimes. This is not a disparity ratio, but this is looking at the demographics of the arrestees and the known offenders from our police reports. This more closely echoes the demographics from police reports than it does the census population. So in 2017, from our police reports that had 4,199 known offenders or arrestees listed, 56% were African American, 36% were Caucasian, and then about 6% total were Hispanic and Asian. And then in 2018, we had about 3,500 offenders listed on police reports, offenders and known offenders and arrestees. Got it. 60% were African American, and then 33% were Caucasian, and a smaller percentage were Hispanic and Asian. So as our summary, the number of stops that we conducted in 2018 was consistent with the number of stops that we conducted in 2017. Most of the stops we conducted were for reactive reasons. 68% of the 2018 reportable pedestrian stops were conducted with African American, and 66% of non-reportable stops were conducted with African American pedestrians. This demographic echoes the police report demographics, but neither is directly comparable to the census population. And then moving forward for 2019, we're changing the methodology for data collection, narrowed the definition of the public place to be more in line with the legislative intent and what other agencies' reporting practices are. The early projected data indicates our number of stops will be quite a bit lower in 2019 because of the way that we've changed the definitions. And moving forward, the 2019 data, we're not going to look backwards at the 2018 and 2017 because we've changed the definitions, and the methodology is not going to be consistent, but we'll have a more clear definition of public place. questions.
Yes,
Sharice?
thank you. Okay, so basically, what I'm trying to understand is, you changed the statistics because you changed the way that you were counting the pedestrian stops?
We changed, yeah, so the practice is the same, but we're changing what we're reporting, so.
So what is your rubric for stopping people other than you were called and they might be, I mean, I'm just trying to take all
Sure.
this in because of the simple fact that of the high percentage of African Americans that are stopped. So my question is, what rubric are you using to stop people in general?
Sure.
And
Okay.
And what defines or constitutes? There's quite a few, police words out there I'm not familiar with. Investigative stop. I don't know what that means. What constitutes? Is that like you just stop people? You're investigating something and you just stop them, and what constitutes something that's reported and something that's not reported?
Sure. Okay. I'll take a run at these.
Okie dokie.
First of all, you're right. We just, in 10 minutes, dumped a lot of information on you in the presentation. So I do understand that, and I recognize that. With regards to a rubric, the United States Supreme Court would say it's the totality of the circumstances test. Okay?
What does that mean?
What that means is there are a variety of facts and circumstances that may dictate, and I can't necessarily in any particular case give you an exact example. However, the Supreme Court has different levels of suspicion. And so we will go with reasonable suspicion, and that's the level of facts and circumstances that would lead someone to believe that criminal activity may be afoot. There's probable cause, which is a little bit higher up that scale, which is what is needed to make an arrest, or we would issue a notice to appear or something. And then, I feel like the city attorney should be given this class. And then there's the proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So for criminal cases, this would be what we would need in a jury trial. So this is a quick sort of continuum, if you will. And so when we make investigative stops, Terry stops, detentions, so it's kind of the same similar term, but we might be something as simple as Bryant and Melissa were seen in the park and he shoved her, and I storm off in the park, and the officer goes, there was a white male in a dark suit that just took off that way, and he just shoved that female. That would be enough for the officers to go out, and they see me walking down the sidewalk, they would make that detention, conduct the investigation, interview me, interview her, interview witnesses, look for injuries, and then they could then decide what enforcement action they would make. With regards to what's reportable or non-reportable, in my little story I just told you there, if we go and we investigate this and I didn't shove her, I just walked by, accidentally bumped into her, we do the investigation, they don't frisk, search, summons, or arrest me, that would be a non-reportable stop for this study purposes because they didn't do frisk, search, summons, or arrest. If we do those four things, or one of those four things, that's what triggers the activation, if you will, or the forwarding of that data onto IDOT. If, on the other hand, we do all of our investigation and we determine that I do need to be frisk, search, summons, or arrested, then that's the one that gets reported. If we don't, then that data doesn't get reported. Is that
Okay.
am I good on that one then? And essentially, the tension is that person would not be free to leave while we sort out the circumstances. The seminal case on this is Terry v. Ohio, 1968, where there was a guy that was doing certain things, going back and forth in front of some sort of retail establishment,
Right. I
hiking
think
up
I've
his
heard of this
pants because
one.
I kept sliding down on the one side because he had his gun tucked in there, and the officers made a lot of observations. And the analysis is from the perspective of the officer, a trained officer, not necessarily average Joe citizen. Just because a person's walking back in front of the store and hikes up his pants, somebody might not think anything of that. But if an officer with knowledge of the area, knowledge of that person and all these circumstances.
Yeah, I've heard of this
so those reasons are what we're looking at. And sometimes there's disputes over those reasons, and that's why things go to court and lawyers file motions to suppress, and those things happen.
Okay, but before you move on, because I guess a question regarding the reporting or non-reporting. So if you, let's say that I fit the description and I'm stopped, I haven't done anything, but when you stop me, you find a certain amount of weed in my pockets or something. Then what? But I haven't done anything. I'm not doing anything. I'm walking down the street, minding my own business, not doing anything.
Sure. And so then the analysis that the judge, well, let's see what happens. So if, again, there just happens to be, in my park example, a white male in a dark suit walking away from the park, but there's two of them. One is Bryant and one is Joe, and they stop Joe, and they end up finding contraband for whatever reason. And there was a frisk, search, summons, or arrest. That would indeed get reported to IDOT, because the stop of a pedestrian in a public place that ultimately led to the frisk, search, summons, or arrest, that would be reportable to IDOT.
Even if I was stopped for no probable,
See, and that's, I guess I would argue that in that particular case, all the facts and circumstances were correct, and the officer would then say, okay, there just happened to be the wrong, and there are cases out there where those sorts of things have happened, and then they found the kilo of cocaine in the house.
Right.
That, well, indeed, it's unfortunate for you, sir, but you're going to have to pay the penalty for the kilo of cocaine.
Okay. The other question I had, excuse me. So with the counting thing, because I really had that kind of lit me up a little bit when you said, we just changed the way we counted.
Sure.
So tell me, how does one just change the way you count, and then all of a sudden everything goes down 10 points?
Sure.
10 percentage points.
So what if let me jump back to the other definition page. The biggest thing was going to be the public place. How did we define a public place? So that the officers know when they need to fill out the form. So there's a pedestrian stop form. The state of Illinois produced these. Each agency was allowed to monitor them or modify them and change them a bit. And so what we did was we used that particular form, and then the question became one of public place. Walmart was the first example that came to mind that we had, where we had a lot of these that they counted as, they counted because it was a stop of a pedestrian in a public place, and we had at the time defined it as publicly accessed.
Okay.
And by asking and talking with others and reading and contemplating further and all the other things that we talked about, the intent of the law was more to look for those stops where indeed guys were jumping out, and the theory was that people are getting thrown against the wall and frisked all over, not necessarily that there was a shoplifter in Walmart. And so by doing those things, we tried to hone in on what we thought were the most appropriate areas for when the officers would be having these types of interactions. So that's why we changed that.
Cherise, Carol's got another thought for this as well.
So I was wondering if you could just maybe walk Cherise through the comparison that was done across a bunch of jurisdictions that showed Urbana's numbers like grossly out of whack.
Yeah.
Given
Sure.
our population. So that's the piece that led to us examining what we were counting.
So part of that analysis was, as we looked at this, there was Chicago and whatever other 900-ish agencies, Chicago, Cicero, and Urbana, Illinois.
Or the top
Yeah,
three.
but the populations of Chicago and Cicero and Urbana, I mean, we can fit
So-
Urbana in either one of those.
So, exactly. So the question was, why are Urbana numbers so high? what's happening here. And
Okay.
that's what led to the reaching out to the other agencies
Okay.
and the Peorias and the Rockfords, and to try to determine, indeed, what's happening? Why aren't how are you guys counting those? Oh, we're counting them this way. We see how you guys are doing it.
So within the state of Illinois, my question now is this: within the state of Illinois, do other police districts, are we all now on the same page as far as how things are going to be counted?
Absolutely
So
not.
we just do things willy-nilly and we can say whatever we want, basically?
I don't, well, with regards to cross comparison, maybe she should speak to that a little bit. I can tell you that indeed, one of the agencies that we contacted had 2 pedestrian stops of a decently sized city, and I was.
Danville.
That was, and so that seemed sort of a tip. So what I want to do is focus on how we're trying to do it, and so we use those as sort of instructive in how we tried to craft what we thought was more reasonable and accurate data as far as what the legislature was looking for.
Diane, did you still want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to back up what they've been saying, because I was participating in reaching out to some of these other agencies. The frustrating thing about this legislation was the lack of clarity, lack of definitions, and it left everybody up to their own devices to create their own definitions and really develop their own method. So that's why you got such wild variations in numbers reported from 2 to hundreds, and that's why we wanted to develop a process that is more reflective of the policing that we do and not the reporting. And I think this is a much more accurate approach.
Okay. So, all right. So I'm just trying to understand, none of this, the way that these were reported, made you question at all how things may have been policed. It only made you think about how it was being reported.
Correct.
So the policing, in your opinion, is fine?
I believe the policing is fine, that's correct.
Okay. I'm going to leave it like that for now. Okay.
Who's next, Bill? I think I saw you raise your hand earlier.
Yeah, I guess one thing when we were talking about it was that because of all this extra data that was being collected on people that were shoplifting or people that had a domestic inside and then they were out in their yard when they got arrested, so they were reported. It wasn't really what we're looking at as far as when a police officer just stops somebody on the sidewalk because they're suspicious, because the police officer thinks they're suspicious, and that's kind of what we wanted to get the numbers on, I think. So all this extra data collection was really just creating a lot of noise, is overwhelming the data we were interested in. So that's why I think it helps to narrow it down, to focus on what we were really interested in. So that's the attempt that's being made here, I think. The other thing I wanted to comment on was the difference between a frisk and a search. Maybe like is that the reasonable suspicion versus
So a
probable
frisk is usually done in the context of looking for a weapon, something that's large, and so there'll be usually crushing of material to figure out if what is this? Oh, it's a gun or it's a knife. A frisk. A search is going to be a little more intrusive. We're going to do what's in the pockets, maybe what's in the top cuff of the sock, what's actually there.
So in Teresa's example, if you hadn't done anything wrong and you didn't get arrested, you would probably just be frisked, right? To make sure you didn't have
If there was some sort of report of a weapon of some sort, there was some danger involved in this particular incident, then that's when we would frisk. So.
And usually a frisk wouldn't turn up a small amount of marijuana or something like that?
Not usually. It's not necessarily impossible depending on the scenario and the facts, but traditionally, no, the frisk is going to be something more weapons-based.
Okay, thanks.
Sure, so I'm going to let some others go, and we'll come back, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Eric, I think I had seen you next.
So I guess my understanding of the intent of the legislation was, in fact, to pose the question of whether the policing was fine or fair. But it seems to me that when when the legislation's not clear, and when the state refuses to provide any interpretation of the legislation, so that there's no way to, I mean, a prime research question to see if the policing was fine would be to see how how practice is varying from one jurisdiction to another. Now, it looks to me as though that is impossible because of the fact that the state is not providing sufficient guidance on exactly what the legislation means. So I'm seeing you working really hard to at least find the most reasonable interpretation that you can of what makes sense to provide an assessment. And hopefully, if other jurisdictions get on the same page, then we'll have a way to look at whether the policing is fine or not.
Mary Alice?
Well, I was going to say pretty much what Eric just said. I think that, I think everybody was really surprised by the numbers that came out by the state, particularly because Urbana was so high, and that really led us to question, are our numbers that high? Are they truly that high? Or is there something else going on here? At the end of the day, I think the only thing that we can do without lack of clarification from the legislatures or from the state is we can only compare within our own city. And so that means if you're talking about practice, right? So practice would only be within our city. Are we stopping more people? Are we stopping less people? Are we stopping them for different reasons? Are we searching more people? But until those two other entities are able to actually give us more clarity and enforcement, because half of the agencies actually aren't even reporting, we will never be able to compare between our cities. At least that's my understanding based on everything that we've talked about. Now, I think that, to Cherie's point, I think that it would be interesting, and I don't even know if this is possible, to know if we report pedestrian stops, the stops that are reported to IDOT, so the frisk, search, summons, or arrest, okay, if those are not in conjunction with the reason for the stop. So I think that Cherie was saying, well, if you are stopped initially in the park because of a fight, and then I arrested you because you had a kilo of cocaine in your backpack, you weren't initially stopped for that fight. I mean, you could say that maybe the fight was about the kilo of cocaine, but we're going to pass that up for a moment. So I don't know if you're understanding what I'm saying here, but basically, there is a reason for the stop, similar to what we do in the traffic stop. There's a reason for the traffic stop, and there's a result of that, and are they related to one another? I think maybe that gets a little bit to what Cherie was talking about.
Yeah, kind of, but I also want to know why the percentage of, I mean, I know that as an African American in Urbana, we don't have that high of a percentage in the city. So
Sure.
How is it that we have such a high percentage in with those numbers?
Sure. And I think, and I'll let Melissa maybe double check on, or hit that slide again with regards, maybe try to go over that one more time, because I know, again, it was a lot of stuff. I think what we've tried to do is try to say how did we, understanding what you said, that it's 15% of the population is African American, why are 60%
Where are
of the
you
stop?
where are these
Sure.
stops happening, and why?
And so that's
Where are
why
you
I think
policing?
that's, well, I guess, I don't know that I can speak to where. I can speak to a little bit as far as to, we try to figure out, how do we compare it? What are we going to compare that number to? Okay, so we, in the traffic stops, if you recall, we had a rather lengthy sort of discussion about how we've parsed out traffic stop, traffic crash involvement. And we thought that was a better denominator in our comparison. And so what we've done here, and that is tried to use the police reports as some sort of guidance. It's not causal. It's just simply maybe to help sort of frame the conversation. And I think when and I don't know, Melissa, if there's anything you want to add to this as to why we've tried to tease this out of this particular, using this as one of our guideposts.
Yeah, so this is the information is from, so we get 25,000, 30,000 calls for service a year, and that's kind of a misnomer, but those are the number of dispatch tickets that we get, and some of them are citizen initiated, some of them are officers will call out that they're going to do a traffic stop, and then from that we write a smaller number of police reports, and the police reports will have, if we've made an arrest or if we've issued an NTA, that'll have someone listed as an arrestee, or if there's enough information to know who the offender is, but then we don't take any enforcement action, we'll know who the offender is, and that'll be written down on the police report. So this is a smaller pool, but it's still, it's indicative of arrestees and known offenders on offenses that have resulted in a police report. So
Yeah,
it's
as
a little
reported.
bit more precision as reported.
To the police, correct.
Did you consider looking at that with different reasons for arrest? I mean, whether it was a violent crime versus a drug crime. I mean, the argument, I think, is that this could be self-perpetuating if you arrest African Americans more often for minor violations, and it's going to raise these numbers, and then you're going to have higher numbers to compare them to, and that would justify more,
Yeah, so the back and forth. So these are, in 2018, it was 3,500 people. When we're looking at 300 pedestrian stops, it's a small. So the 300 people in here that resulted in an arrest or an NTA are included in this. So it's a little bit. There's a little bit of pollution in there, but it's not. The number of individuals that are listed on police reports is significantly greater than the number of pedestrian stops that we've written. But no, I haven't broken it down by crime.
I think
That may be helpful.
Yeah.
If you do.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong with my impression. I'm sorry, Dennis. I'll come right back to you. Correct me if I'm wrong with my impression that I'm not getting the sense that we have, as we work so hard to do, our baseline, if you will, yet, of, we have a disparity ratio in traffic stops. We're not really looking at one here. We're kind of just discussing flat data without necessarily interpreting it in any particular way. Am I hearing that from you guys at this time?
I'm not sure that the goal is to have a baseline, because this isn't going to be a random sample of all people in Urbana. And most of these are reactive in response to a call, and that could be a call for retail theft, or it could be a call for battery, or it could be a call for robbery, it could be a call for property damage. So it's not, I don't think that there's one specific crime type that I can pull out and say, okay, this is exactly what our demographics of the pedestrian stop should look like, because it's so reactive to the call type.
Okay, so just in that context, amongst ourselves as council, I think that it's important that we frame what it is we're trying to do and what question it is that we're asking about this data, because I don't think it's as defined as our mission in traffic stops. I mean, we don't have the same thing that we're looking at. We're talking about it, but what does it mean? Charisse is getting at the roots of those. So I just wanted to put that out there. Dennis, you're up next.
Yeah, I wanted to ask something that kind of led into a more subjective kind of area of inquiring. And it's based on some stories that we've heard, complaints before council in years past. So you were presenting a scenario about what would happen in a park, and it would assume, there was an assumed altercation or whatever, and two people walked away. So I want to ask one that came up in discussion here in council. And get some information on it. Where an individual, African American, is loitering in front of a home, say, and a neighbor observes this and calls in because they feel it's suspicious activity. So the police arrive and they question a suspect. And it turns out the suspect claims he's just waiting for the uncle to come home so he can get in the house. But the fact that he's being questioned by a police officer why he's standing in his front yard of his family's home gets him really angry, and he starts to argue very forcefully with the officer. So at this point, what is the officer going to do? Is he going to take this as an offense to his office and frisk him? Is he going to arrest him for, disrespect? I just wonder, because we've had this kind of a thing happen in the community before. And it kind of comes down to officer-community relations of what happens here. So I just want to get an idea of what would likely happen in a scenario like that.
Well, in this scenario that you've provided,
Yes.
That we have a guy that where the neighbor has made some sort of inference. I
Assumption.
don't know what's happening. There's this guy hanging out over here. I've never seen him before. He's sitting on the porch. That's not the neighbor. I don't know anything about that person. There could be things that, well, did the reporting, so if we're able to get there quickly in your example, and they ask him, and he's able to provide some sort of, no, I'm waiting for someone here, but why are you stopping me? And they have some sort of discussion. As long as there's no crime, when you haven't described one yet, my hope and desire would be the officers, well, we're asked to come out here. We appreciate your cooperation thus far, and could terminate the contact. We want the citizens to call the police, and we want the police to go out and ask. And as you've already alluded to, there are a variety of ways you can have that interaction.
Right.
And if I,
And this comes down to police practice.
sure,
And it's not the numbers, and it's not the, it doesn't come down to the crime, if there's not really a crime, but it has to do with interaction.
right,
And some of the dissatisfaction that we've heard from the African-American community has to do with the quality of interaction. And this is like, pedestrians who are not in a bike, they're not, in a car.
Right.
They're on the street doing something or nothing. So I just was saying that this is kind of where I feel the crux of the matter kind of in this community seems to be hinged at, that, it's, if there is a crime and there's evidence that is resulting from that, that's one thing. But if it turns out that it's just really a bad interaction between community and police, that's what I think we should be trying to tease out, and maybe we can make significant corrections in this area. And I don't know quite how, but I think that'd be an important thing to consider.
Sharice?
That was why I was asking about, the fact that you think that your policing is fine, the numbers are just wrong. Because it can't be one with, it can't just be that. There has, not with this high a percentage of people being stopped. I'm sure that the policing is not just A-OK, okie dokie, everybody's perky, because obviously, in my opinion, from looking at these numbers, it cannot be just that. It can't be that there's always some kind of crime, even if it's just an ego issue between an officer and whoever was stopped or something, because I know that can get out of hand. I'm just, however your practices are, is something that you and I have had this conversation, is something that you can always go back and try to, how can we do this differently? How can we relate to this community differently? Because this is still off the chain for me.
Well,
sorry.
and let me at least say, with regards to some of these numbers initially, when we had the numbers that were so high, that's when we said there's got to be some kind of a counting error. There has to be. We wouldn't have this many stops compared to Chicago, Cicero, Urbana. Mathematically, when we have other departments that have 15 people on a shift and we have 5, this doesn't make sense. What's happening there? And with regards to the interaction piece that's been brought up a couple different times here tonight, I will always tell the officers, no matter what we're doing, if you treat people with grace and respect, then we will be able to get through a lot of things, and we will be able to maneuver through a lot of complex scenarios. But it's extremely important that they do that, and they know that, and they've heard me say that more than one time.
Diane, did you want to comment?
Could you go back to the slide with reactive and proactive? Because that, I think, is also a really significant slide in that it indicates why this interaction is taking place in the first place.
So,
Yes, correct.
Are we saying that the police react more because they're called out more?
Yeah, the reactive are calls for service.
So, yeah, there were
In the
there 7 or
African-American
8?
community?
I think there's 7 or 8, Sharice, I think there's 7 or 8 different reasons, and those were defined by statute. We didn't get to necessarily pick those. They were
Okay.
given to us.
Uh-huh.
And so as we looked, and I don't, if you want to, and
Yeah.
when we look at this one, you'll see that box where that was, those top 3 boxes.
Right, I see.
Where so someone has called the police to come here, and fits the description of I mean, you can read those and with it, hey, and then it was the officers respond, and so the person's right there in my park example, or fits the description. If those boxes were checked, that's what put that tally mark into that reactive Pac-Man mouth that we just saw a minute ago.
Yeah.
Pie chart.
The pie chart, yeah.
Eric?
Okay.
I wonder, people have expressed concern about not just the numbers, but the quality, nature of the interaction. And we could capture a lot of these on the body cams. Maybe they already are being captured. But on the other hand, I think there are problems with actually looking at them because of the privacy concerns for the residents, the people who are interacting with the police. But I wonder if there's any way to gather some kind of, I guess, what the researchers would call ethnographic evidence as opposed to statistical evidence, based on what can be seen in the body cams.
I know that the sergeants spot check, and they have to get a couple each month of the officers and their squad car videos and then their body cam videos. And I can't remember if it's one a month off the top of my head here, but there is a sort of quality check assurance. The other thing that I would say, when we looked at the 2019 data moving forward, and again, this is where after we've tried to hone in on this, how many total pedestrian stops were there
Right now, or how
for
many do you think
19?
they're going to be?
No, right now. We had 46 or 47 in 5.5 months. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well as I believe that was the rough number or the number that we had when we cut the data to start preparing for this. So I just thought that would be important as well.
Mary Alice?
So out of those 46, are we still seeing the same pattern of racial distribution?
I did not run the full numbers for the 2019. I just was
Okay,
looking
I
at
was just
how many
curious
we've done.
because, I mean, it's
Yeah.
pretty consistent
Yeah.
between 2017 and
Yeah.
2018. And just to refresh, what are the ends for 2017, 2018? It's about 400 roughly?
Yeah, about 400 each. 400 for reportable, 400 non-reportable.
Melissa, I think also, I think the one other, did we have a breakdown of reactive versus proactive and reportable and non-reportable?
Yeah. So that's reportable and non-reportable. So the non-reportable is a little bit more proactive. The reportable is a little bit more reactive. There's more other, it's just it's hard to try and break this down into, there are a million different combinations that you can have with 8 boxes. You can have all 8 marked or just one or just any of these other ones. So this is my best effort at that.
Gotcha. Even though you did break out proactive, you didn't break out reactive, and were those 3 categories evenly split? Is that why you combine them and we don't see those 3 categories of reactive broken out?
So it would have been if any of those were marked. So it could have been fit description and proximity and fit description, or it could have been
Right,
fit
because
both
they're
descriptions. So I didn't-
non-exclusionary, right? It could have been a
Right, yeah, so it could
combination
have
of
been
any
of them.
3.
So it's-
Correct. Or
so it's
all
just-
3 or 1.
Yeah.
But in non-reportable, ultimately, it means that a call for service was made in one form or fashion or another. The officer came, discovered that that person was not involved, essentially, or
Did not take enforcement action.
did not take enforcement
Right,
action.
so there were several that was open alcohol, which could have led to an NTA, or they were in the park after hours, or they were walking against the flow of traffic, or whatever. So there were several within the non-reportable that could have led to enforcement action, but did not.
Okay. Because I guess I'm thinking, Chief, of my own education about how bad citizens are at identifying persons who've committed crimes, and how often people may be mistaken for someone, or may match a description type situation. So I personally would be interested in seeing those breakdowns, even if they are combinations there and thereof. I understand why you combine them for ease of analysis and presenting this to us, but I would like to see them as in their combination forms, and or if it was the only thing that was checked, I would like to see that information, because I think that also goes into, that we can tease more knowledge from where the interaction started and where it ended up, based on knowing that they came there to match a description or proximity to a crime, et cetera, et cetera. Can you provide those breakdowns for me?
So we push all of it to the open data portal. All of the pedestrian stops are pushed up there. They're literally, I'm not sure how I would take 400 stops and cut it into all of these different possible combinations.
Well, there's 3.
Well, for 3, it could be fit description and casing, or fit description and other. So there's
Isn't it just a polynomial, right? 3 times 2 times 1, and
so if
that's
we're just
only
looking at the 3 and not any of the others.
right.
But it could be with the others as well.
But
So
it
it's
could-
more than 3.
Oh, right, because it could have been any of the other 4 as well,
Right.
in addition to also those 3.
Right. Can you aggregate all the possible combinations and then list out of the reactive maybe the top 3 or top 5, and then lump in the rest of them as other? I can show you.
Well, it's on the open.
If there's a
I can
faster way
show
to do
you
it
what
than
I'm
what I'm
talking
thinking in my head, sure, but if it's...
Melissa's looking at us like it's on the open data portal.
I know.
And I know, and I want Melissa, I got some other stuff I need Melissa to help with.
I'll call you and ask you to
So,
help me download
I-
it, and
I-
then I'll just
Could
do
I
it.
just, if there was something specific that you were trying to tease out, then maybe Melissa could help with that, versus having her run a bunch of combinations and go, that doesn't help me. So if we could be more laser, but if you want to run combinations, then I think that's the perfect thing to use the open data portal for. But if there was something specific you were looking for, she can probably figure the best way to.
Sure. Well,
Tease it out.
I think what Charisse is getting after, and the question of why this came to us even in the first place is a concern for analysis, was because of the unseemingly high number that was initially broached. But now, looking at it more closely and more narrowly defined, we're also looking at the question of why so many African Americans. And that's the root of what I'm getting after. And I know that because so many of these are reactive, they are not necessarily things we can control.
Yeah.
Because it's not our police department choosing to interact with an individual to an extent. But to some extent, officers are trained to identify people and, find people, and I'm sure they make mistakes of stopping the wrong person, stopping someone who was not involved in something. I'm sure that happens, and I think that if we're able to find out a little bit more about when that happens, how that happens, and what the result of those particular interactions are, because I think that's where the crux of people feel wronged and have a negative interaction with the police, is like Dennis's example, and I know exactly who you're talking about. We've all heard Martell Miller's story of being stopped by the police on his uncle's front porch, and having a very negative interaction with the officer for having done nothing and having done no crime. So I think that's where we're all trying to get to with this, is where does that interaction come in, and the proactive nature of the police versus reactive. Do you understand where I'm trying to get at with those practices?
And one of the other things that else with regards to his example as well is, and we've preached on this, is the providing of the information because you will, no doubt, stop the wrong red car once in a while coming from the bank robbery. There's a red car heading southbound, and there's one south on Race and one south on Vine. And they're going to stop them both, and one of them will be the wrong automobile. How do you interact with them? What information? How do you tell them that? And those are the things that we continue to work on to make sure that the officers are having those professional contacts. And generally speaking, I think they do a pretty good job of that.
So do you see any way of putting that into this type of a report for us, Chief, to talk about these types of situations where, I mean, I think we would all like to hear where one went wrong and what was done about it, or where one went right, and here's somebody who gave us a compliment about it. Because for the rest of us, we're relying entirely on you and your anecdotes about what those interactions are to understand how those interactions are going, because we are not there for the vast majority of the time. I've never, in all my years living here, been outside of when I'm doing a ride-along with the police, been involved in a police interaction. So other than the one time they were called to my house when I was having a party. But that was not in the context of what I think most of what we're trying to get at. So we're relying on you to provide us with evidence that they're doing it. If our constituents or people are coming here and complaining about that behavior, you're telling us the officers are doing fine. It's a mixed message.
Sure.
We're trying to tease it out with data, but I don't think that we're finding that it's being very useful to us.
Well, it's kind of hard to do it with the data if you're going to change the data.
Well, and we're not
If
providing
there's
good
no
guidelines for
clarification,
it.
Yeah, there's no clarification, there's no guidelines, there's no
Right.
no real rubric, coming down even from the state on high to direct you as to how this is going to be done properly, or if this is what we're looking for. You know what I'm saying? If there's no what is the goal to having to do this? What are you ultimately looking for? Is it about the stoppage of, in demographics, and if there's changes in there? Because if that is what is supposed to be mitigated here, then on some level there has to be something more clear about, before you get to the courthouse suing somebody about whatever. There has to be something, this is what we're trying to prevent, or this in an effort to prevent, or an effort to ameliorate a particular situation. This is what needs to be done, and I can't.
Carol's
difficult.
got one comment for you.
Yeah, I mean, imposing those are all perfectly legitimate questions, but imposing those to the chief and to Melissa, they're rhetorical, because those questions, we didn't create.
I know,
Yeah.
and I know they don't even know that, but that's what makes it kind of difficult to digest the numbers for me, is because it's like, I want to know what the directive is. What is it that you're looking for, I guess?
Dan?
We have asked multiple times, multiple people, and no one can tell us.
So nobody knows who the wizard is? What's the deal?
Eric, go ahead.
So I was never a legislator, but I lived with one for 12 years. And I think I know what happened here. What happened here was that there was a generalized desire to do something about perceived disparities in pedestrian stops. But there was a pushback on all of the specificities that might have been put in the law. And so what the legislators did is they did what they do, which is to compromise by taking all the specificities out, but passing the law so that it looked as though they were dealing with the problem. So, this kind of thing happens all the time in Springfield, at every other state capital, and in DC also. So I think what you guys are doing and I think you're really making a very intelligent and honest effort to do it, is to work with the law and make the best possible sense out of it that you can, in order that we can actually extract some meaning out of the information, and figure out what the statistics mean. Do the statistics mean, on the one hand, that there is a biased treatment towards African Americans, or do they mean that the statistics are just following the calls for service, which are higher in African American neighborhoods? And I guess the only thing I would say is, if we can figure out a way, I mean, you could look at the statistics and really not know the answer to that question for sure. But I think that I mean, we got the body cameras for a reason. And the reason we got the body cameras is to be able to monitor things. One of the reasons that we got the body cameras is to be able to monitor things that we can't capture statistically about the quality of the interactions between police officers and civilians. So I guess I would just come back to that. If we can figure out a way to, without invading the privacy of everybody who gets on camera, but with respect to that privacy, is there a way that we can, capture somehow the quality of those interactions from the data? I think would be helpful.
Bill, did you have one? I'm sorry, Carol, do you want to respond to that real quick?
Well, that has a lot of merit in theory. The execution of that is incredibly time intensive, and there was all kinds of privacy things as you pointed out. So I think that would be fantastic, but we don't have those kind of resources.
Well, yeah, and I'm not surprised that you're saying that, and I believe completely that what you're saying is true. If we can think about a reasonable way to do that, because that doesn't mean looking at all of the interactions. It means looking at a sufficient sample of the interactions that you can start to see, gosh, maybe there's something wrong, or maybe things are pretty good. But again, I know that I realize, Carol, that's easy for me to say, and a big job to do, even in a minimal way. But yeah, let's think about it, and whether whether there is a way to dig deeper into what's actually happening in these interactions. I think that you've made a terrific start. I think that the way you are now defining the stops makes really good sense. And the fact that you have a concrete definition of what constitutes a pedestrian stop. And I think that's a big step forward in terms of the integrity of the data. And who knows, maybe we could even get the rest of the state to define it that way.
Bill, then Sharice.
Yeah, I think, as far as legislative intent goes, it could have actually been meant to be pretty open and let people who are interested in it and who care about it, like us, to try to define it better. It's a hard thing to define as far as, what stops to count. I think we did kind of go overboard in counting everything. Even Champaign, whose numbers were also pretty high, didn't count shoplifting. That's kind of interesting on its own. You can pull shoplifting out at any time and look at it, but the demographics of that our police don't really control. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's bias in the store actually reporting those. So I think the approach now, defining it more narrowly, is the right way to go, so that we can see more specifically where police bias could potentially be. I think if the numbers were 80% African-American stops and only 20% of our police interactions or police arrests were African-American, that would be very concerning, and that would be definitive. Then you would get a definitive answer from this. But since they're pretty close, 60% and 60%, it's not as definitive. It doesn't tell us we aren't biased, but it doesn't tell us we are. So I think that's a better sign than if it was the opposite, the other way. So I think you're on the right track. I think, did you actually show demographics of proactive versus reactive?
I did not.
Okay. Was there much difference?
I did not.
Didn't look at it?
I didn't look
Okay.
at that, no.
So it'll be interesting to see how that changes. I assume the reactive would probably become a smaller percentage of the pie if we're looking at under the 2019 take. But the numbers in general, too, you're talking about, this was about 400 a year,
Yeah.
reportable in the last 2 years of the intensive counting everything. And now you're thinking it'll be closer to 100 to 150 a year, maybe.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 3 a week. That seems reasonable, 3 pedestrian stops a week for a department of our size, of the kind that we're interested in, whether somebody's fishing or not. We don't, I mean, that's kind of what that's the question, really, is are people unreasonably suspicious of African-American people, whether it's, if it's police officers, we'd really like to know, and we'd like to handle it, but if it's citizens, calling in because they're suspicious, we need to know that too, because there's work to be done there too.
Sharice, I'm sorry, Bill, were you not done?
Yeah. So I think I'm done. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sharice.
All I wanted to know is also, so this year, now that you've changed how you're counting and now that you've got some more definitive questions or how you're going to report it and so on and so forth, this year then is actually the ground of this. So next year, when you are doing your pedestrian report, you're going to compare it to this year, and we're not going to look at 17 and 18, right? 2017, 2018.
No, we would be counting it differently. So we would, there's not a good way to go backwards. I can't take 17 and 18 and just take out the ones that
No, so what I'm saying, though, is that you've changed the way that, what you're counting and how you're counting it. So this year is like year one.
Yep, this
Correct.
is now
Correct.
year one.
And so this year's year one, next year, it'll be a comparative to this year.
Yes.
And you're going to keep these particular rules or
Sure.
categories as far as your reporting how the pedestrian stops go, and that's what it's going to be.
That is our
Period.
intent.
That's
That
going
is
to
our
be
intent.
that's going to be the Urbana police policy regarding this particular.
That is our intent, and I will tell you, we thought that in 16 when we rolled this out in the end of 15. But I think now, having looked at all of this, we believe that we're now in a much more solid position to make some analysis as we move forward. But
Okay.
Yes, that's it is our intent to 2019 essentially that's our fresh data break, January
Okay.
1st.
So, okay.
All right, last chance for questions. We've got one citizen comment coming after this. All right, thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Jason Rock, you are up next.
Send you lots of emails. Yeah.
Jason, I know you've been here before. Make sure you pull the mic up, and
Yeah,
you'll
absolutely.
have five minutes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I didn't know exactly what this was going to be about, but I saw pedestrian and I figured I'd show up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the lack of care and forethought given to pedestrian and cyclist infrastructure in Urbana, because I think something that didn't get mentioned in this discussion was how infrastructure can create criminalization of standard practices that people behave or how they behave. So, for example, drivers that run stoplights are rarely ticketed, and pedestrians that jaywalk are rarely ticketed except in certain minority districts. In Urbana, the only pedestrian that I've ever seen get talked to by a police officer was a person of color. Even though, as anyone that spends any time in Urbana knows, the vast majority of the people jaywalking in Urbana are white, older white people walking across the street to Courier. And there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm not saying that we should be ticketing those people because it's safe to walk across that street. I jaywalk on that street all the time. But there is disparate impact. And so this is why it's important to provision and maintain quality pedestrian infrastructure. And I think, at least in downtown Urbana, there's been some issue with that recently. It hasn't been a long-term issue. I've lived here for a handful of years now that I don't want to admit because my PhD's taken a bit longer than it should. But throughout the winter, the Cohen building was being maintained, and the part of Race Street sidewalk was closed, and there was no provision for a pedestrian bypass. And what that meant in practice is that people walked into the street to get around that closure. Shortly after, the Iron Post building was having brickwork done, and so the Race Street was closed again. The pedestrian portion of Race Street was closed again without any pedestrian bypass for that as well, so people were walking in the street. Crane Alley, shortly after that, was having roof stuff done, and they closed the bike lane on Main Street and the sidewalk on Main Street for the day. And during all of these times, cycling and pedestrian access to downtown Urbana was sacrificed to maintain driving access to downtown Urbana. Instead of ever taking some space from motorists to provide bypasses to these things, we took space from the pedestrians and didn't give them anywhere else to go. And I think that the problem with this is sort of systematic. We accept this because obviously we have to prevent any sort of negative impact on the important people that are driving through Urbana, but we don't think about the pedestrians that are walking in Urbana. And this is a problem with how parking in the bike lanes on Main Street is enforced. So I've been very annoyed by this problem, as Mayor Marlin and the Chief of Police can attest. And so on May 9th, I sat outside and paid attention and watched Main Street and ran a stopwatch whenever the bike lane was parked in. And for that hour, that stopwatch ran for 40 minutes. So there was a truck parked in the bike lane from 9:07 to 9:22. At 9:10, an Urbana Police Department car drove by westbound on Main. At 9:18, that same police car, I believe, drove eastbound on Main, passing the truck both times without stopping to ask the driver to move out of the bike lane, which is, of course, illegal. After this truck departed, the bike lane was open for 11 minutes before being blocked again at 9:33 and remained blocked until I left. I shouldn't have to call the dispatch line every time this happens. The police should be taking a proactive enforcement stance. And the other thing is that we should change the infrastructure so that delivery drivers have a place to park that isn't in that bike lane. There's plenty of parking in downtown Urbana. We could take some of the street parking and turn it into a loading zone from between the hours of, say, 7 and 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. without any impact, I think, on the businesses in downtown Urbana. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. All right, we're going to move on to our last resolution, then we have a short discussion afterwards. Resolution number 2019-05-014R, a resolution in support of establishing the Downtown Historic District Community Development. Newly christened Marcus Ricci is going to present to us.
Good evening. Thank you. On behalf of the City of Urbana, Alice Novak, Chair of their Urbana Historic Preservation Commission, submitted a nomination to the Illinois State Historic Preservation Office to list the downtown Urbana Historic District on the National Register of Historic Places. The district is generally bound by Illinois Street, Cedar Street, Goose Alley, Water Street, Walnut Street, and Vine Street, and covers approximately 7 city blocks. The Illinois State Historic Preservation Office has determined that the nomination satisfies the National Register standards for documentation and will present the nomination to the Illinois Historic Sites Advisory Council on June 28th. The Historic Preservation Commission and the mayor of certified local governments may review, comment, and solicit public input and public remarks on the nomination and advise ISAC on whether or not the proposed district satisfies the National Register criteria for nomination. The purpose of the proposed resolution in front of you tonight is to provide guidance to the mayor regarding comments she may submit to the ISAC regarding the nomination. Professor Novak was not able to be here tonight to answer questions about the submitted registration form. Oh, sorry. Not paying attention. Thank you. And also you heard from Dan Maloney regarding his work that he's doing on the Cohen Building and how it started his goal to submit information and help get the district started. City staff believe that the district should be recognized on the National Register. Although listing in the National Register gives credibility to efforts to preserve historic and cultural resources, it does not give the federal government control over a property, nor does it impose any financial obligations on the owners, obligations to make the property accessible to the public, or interfere with an owner's right to alter, manage, or dispose of their property. These restrictions are not governed by the National Register program, but rather by state or local governments. Following an April 2017 tour, ISHPO staff indicated that downtown Urbana was a likely candidate for inclusion as a district on the National Register. On June 7th of 2017, city staff presented this potential National Register district to the Historic Preservation Commission. Professor Novak submitted the completed nomination registration this past April. Landowners and neighbors of the proposed district were sent an invitation to submit comments and or attend the Commission's May 22nd public meeting. No audience members spoke for or against the proposed district. Staff did field a few inquiries resulting in either support or neutrality for the district, but no comments were submitted for City Council. ISAC's public hearing is scheduled for June 28th in Springfield. City staff will be attending, and landowners in the proposed district will be notified of this meeting by mail by ISAC 30 days before the meeting. The proposed district includes 7 city blocks of buildings exhibiting 8 distinct architectural styles. 3 of the buildings in the district are Urbana local landmarks, the Urbana Lincoln Hotel, Busey's Hall, and Tiernan's Block. The proposed district includes 42 contributing buildings, 3 non-contributing buildings or resources, and the previously National Register listed Urbana Lincoln Hotel and Lincoln Square Mall. The application states the district meets criteria A and C under the areas of significance of commerce and politics and government. These criteria are A, that are associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history, and C, that embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or that represent the work of a master, or that possess high artistic values, or that represent a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. And those are listed up on the screen there if you like. The staff report summarizes the political and commercial significance of the proposed district, as well as the characteristic architectural styles present and the existing examples of those styles. Page 37 of the application includes a list of photographs of the buildings in the district, along with the photos of those buildings. During the May 22nd HPC meeting, commission members complimented Professor Novak and her class for the thoroughness and level of detail provided in the nomination application. The commission members came to a general consensus that the proposed district and met the 2 selected National Register criteria and directed the vice chair to complete the application to the ISAC, selecting approve. For the resolution in support of establishing the Downtown Urbana Historic District, the Urbana City Council has the following options: to approve the proposed resolution as presented, approve the proposed resolution as modified, or do not approve the proposed resolution. As I mentioned, the HPC came to a general consensus that the proposed district met the 2 selected National Register criteria. And that is the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions, or Professor Novak can as well.
Does anyone have questions for Marcus? Sharice?
I know it's probably pretty late in the process right now. I was interested as to why Canaan wasn't included in the preservation, Canaan Baptist Church. My understanding is that Joseph Roper, yeah, that that was one of his.
Yeah, it's a great building. We had to really work with the National Register staff in Springfield to get anything that wasn't a commercial building in the district. And that wouldn't have been contiguous. I think there's a liquor store and a parking lot between the fabric of the commercial downtown and Canaan Baptist. And so the only contributing buildings we have, there's the Howard apartment building that's really part of the core, and there's Feegis House and the old gas station that's on Green Street. And I think those are the only non-commercial buildings that have been included. And the reason those were included was because they're a cohesive unit, and National Register looks at not having gaps to the best extent possible. And you know, those are the chief reasons. I mean, I think there could easily be another district that is part of the residential area and includes some of the other buildings. There also was another church. We included one church, the Methodist Church.
United Methodist, yeah.
Next to Lincoln Square. Sorry, I've been losing my voice. But we didn't include the one across the street because National Register staff said if you're jumping across the street, then you're going into that residential zone. And this is about commercial buildings in the downtown.
Okay.
Mary Alice?
Well, first I want to say thank you, because this is a lot of work, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading about a lot of history that I was not aware of in downtown Urbana. So thank you for all that hard work. I have one question, and that is the parking lot. Why is the parking lot of the
Lincoln Square.
mall Lincoln Square? I mean, there's
Yeah.
roads there. There's High
And
Street,
that's,
Walnut.
that's a nationally significant parking lot, by the way.
Okay.
It's, that nomination is about 100 pages on Lincoln Square and the historic Urbana Lincoln Hotel. The parking lots were part of the concept that Victor Gruen had for the design of Lincoln Square Mall, and was part of that development. And so, yes, and so parking lots were included in that original application to the National Register, and so part of that carries forward into this nomination because that building and parking lots is included as well.
All right, thank you.
And
Thank you, Mary
tell
Alice.
us the period of significance for this was what?
1870 to the arbitrary cutoff date, so 50-year rule.
So it wasn't parking lots for the period of significance that the application was submitted for. It was those other downtown commercial buildings that were there back then.
I thought that, I'm pretty sure it was residential back then, because a house I own actually was moved from Lincoln.
Was it all residential?
It's, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
I retract that. Thank you.
The house,
Sorry,
the
still
house that
learning.
used to be, there's two, like one block that way. So.
Dennis, then Bill.
Yeah. Good work. I'll comment more about it, but I'm looking at Exhibit B, which is a diagram of the downtown, which shows parcels that are contributing, non-contributing, previously listed, and the district boundary. These are in pastel colors, if you can catch that.
Wait, oh.
I can pull it
Yes, got it.
It's not numbered, but it's in our packet. There's several different maps actually in our packet that are called Exhibit B, and one is a pink and rose colored diagram of a squared area of the downtown, and there's one with a bunch of blue arrows. And then the third one is the one I'm looking for. And yes, that one. That's the guy. And I'm looking at the very center of the map where we have a section that is called non-contributing, and I see that the parking garage structure is one of those, which makes complete sense. But can you comment upon what looks like to be Crane Alley and the building to the west of it, which are 115 and 119 and 125 west Main
So
Street?
Tiernan's block, which is next to the UBA, that's in the parking garage.
Yes.
That's a contributing building. But then Main Street Plaza, on the other side of Crane Alley, going west.
Yes.
The state and I argued about that one. I mean, I tried to make anything contributing possible.
Oh.
But because there was an application of Drive It or EFS on the exterior of that building, of the Main Street Plaza building, and because probably historically, but some time ago, they had whacked off the hood molds on the windows.
Yes.
That made that really an Italianate structure. So there were too many changes that had been made for the state to agree to have this count as contributing. And while we're on this subject on this block, they're actually, my mistake, we have one more non-contributing building. So there are 4 non-contributing buildings and 41 contributing. So the other non-contributing building, again, was an argument I had with the state, and that is 129 West Main Street, which is a law office. There's a pretty good historic photograph that shows a much, much taller parapet on the building, and there's not that much detail in the building to begin with, and so the state felt that since a good portion of that parapet had been whacked off, that should also be considered non-contributing.
Very interesting to learn this. I mean, I sort of wondered why, and I understand that, well, I'm learning that you had to kind of argue for these to be included, and you lost the argument because such great, so many of the historic details have been removed from these buildings.
Right.
Basically.
And the one that really killed me is across the street, the last of the non-contributing buildings. I think it's 202 West Main Street.
Which is the C4A building
It is. And so that's the oldest building in the downtown that's still standing.
that survived the fire.
About 1854, 1857.
Yes.
And so I just stuck it in as contributing and didn't say anything. And they're like, wait just a minute. Is there anything material-wise that's original to the building? And there's really not. There's a nice label mold around the front window on the second story, but even that's been covered with EFS spray-on material. So that meant that because that wasn't a contributing building, we had to change the period of significance for the district to 1870.
So this is like a very insignificant point, because the more detail we lose from the facades of our buildings by remodeling, the more it damages the historic quality of our downtown, where the buildings which are truly should be included in the district now become useless to us as far as contributing to our downtown aesthetic our unique quality of our downtown. So one of the things I'm going to mention in the future, or before we vote or whatever, is what I think is a very important piece that's missing, and that is to create a downtown design overlay district which gives guidelines to those who are making corrections, modernizations of storefronts in our downtown, to be considerate, to not make a correction that then removes buildings from our downtown from being historically considered by the national listing. And we don't have that. There's no protection, and there's no guidance for future new construction in our downtown. And we know that when you go to a community, you don't go to the shopping mall for tourism, but you go to the historic center of the community where there's going to be Holland, Michigan, or St. Charles, Missouri, or whatever part of the city you go to. You're going to see, you want to go to see the heart of the community, which is really the historic heart of the community, not the modern part, because you can find the modern part on any strip mall in America. So, and plus we got a really famous architect in our locality who we should be celebrating, and actually try to do that.
Bill?
Yeah, so first, just some details on the map. It looks like Shipyard, is it contributing?
No.
It looks like
Well,
it's-
it's we're not counting it.
Okay.
Because it's not a building, and I had it down as a non-contributing site, and they said we don't do that. So
It's just,
it's
okay.
just
It looks like it's kind of shaded in, but maybe it's just the map. And then I know Bunny's building isn't great. It has a lot of cultural history to it, and it has a pretty cool neon sign that's
does.
probably historic.
Yeah.
But that wasn't enough to make it a part of
No.
the district, huh?
Sorry, no.
Okay. And then as far as what restrictions does it put on the property owners as far as, will they need a certificate of appropriateness if they want to paint a mural on the side of the building?
No restrictions whatsoever. You can tear down National Registry buildings, you can alter them. There's no protection. It's an honorary designation.
Okay. Because, well, Marcus mentioned that there's no national restrictions, but it is up to the cities to put any restrictions on it. We don't have any restrictions on buildings that are on the National Register.
No, not unless it also happened
Unless
to
they're
be a
locally
local
landmarked.
landmark.
Okay.
There is the demolition delay ordinance that might delay demolition, but it doesn't stop it.
Okay, thanks.
Marcus, I did have one technical question for you.
My favorite kind.
Yeah. In the memo, it is repeatedly referred to as Criterion 2 and Criterion 4, and the resolution is also referred to as Criterion 2 and Criterion 4. But also in the memo, the criteria for evaluation is listed as A, B, C, and D.
Right.
And you mentioned A and C, but the literal words that we're trying to use is Criterion 2 and Criterion 4, which would be Criterion B and Criterion D, if we were following counting along with our numbers. Which is it, and why the difference?
So A and C are the National Register criteria, and B, excuse me, got it handily bookmarked here.
I think the numbers are what, the ordinance that we have uses part of the National Register criteria plus a few more things.
Okay.
And those might be where the numbers come from.
Right, the numbers are from our historic preservation ordinance.
But
Okay.
National Register is A, B, C, D.
I just wanted to make sure it wasn't an over. I'm sure it wasn't, but I was confused by
Nope.
your reference to A and C, but then 2 and 4. But if there's not an issue, then it's not an
Right,
issue.
it's 2 and 4 in our district, and A and C.
Okay.
For the National Register criteria, and
Okay.
2 and 4 from our ordinance.
Do we not need to mention that in our resolution for it to be
No.
acceptable?
No.
Okay. Thanks. All right, I'd entertain a motion if anyone would like to make one. Mary Alice? Or if you have still questions, I'm sorry.
Nope. I will make a motion that we move forward resolution number 2019-05014R, resolution in support of establishing the Downtown Urbana Historic District to City Council with recommendation for approval.
I'd like to second that.
Motion by Mary Alice, a second from Dennis Roberts. Any further questions, comments, Mayor?
Just a couple of comments. First of all, thank you to Professor Novak and her students for all the work. I know it's been a long time coming, so this is good to see. Second, I'm going to be writing a letter of support for this, so if council members want me to include any specific points, please email me the language you want me to use, and I'll include it in my letter. And that will be less I have to compose. So I would appreciate your perspective on this.
Thank you. Dennis?
I'd actually probably like to go down to Springfield and speak for it personally, and I would like to know the time and the location, please.
11 o'clock, and I can get you the location details.
Great, please do. All right, so I just wrote down a couple of comments. First of all, I truly welcome this nomination, and really I appreciate it so much, Alice Novak, for your single-handed pulling off, I think, a great coup for the downtown. And I want to recognize Dan Maloney also for really wanting it for his own building, but seeing how it could become a tool for many of the businesses in the downtown to upgrade, to repair, to benefit from the tax credits that are offered them for restoring their facades to the more appropriate dimensions of historic detailing. And here's where we might be able to restore some of the buildings that were considered as non-contributing because of the loss of detailing. Maybe the owners might even be inspired to get tax credits to return some of those buildings to an earlier state of repair. So anyway, so I wanted to say that I think it's very important for our downtown because it helps preserve the unique character of our downtown, and because beautiful architecture of our older buildings that are predating the modernisms that are built in the community are unique, and they create a unique setting for so many communities across the United States in attracting people who come to those locations to enjoy them, to see them, because the architecture is usually unique from city to city, even though there are styles that are repeated, which is not really what we can say so much about the most modern versions of architecture, where there's no detailing to the window treatments, there's no detailing to the entranceways, and you either have a flat roof or a slanted roof. So I mean, the lack of uniqueness in these buildings is really what kind of, in my mind, degrades a lot of the modern construction. That to having a well-preserved, well-maintained historic district in the downtown is one of the most important keys to creating a sense of place that can be unique and define the community. That the 20% federal tax credit that a district can make available will incentivize facade rehabilitation, which is vital to maintaining the appearance and the quality of our downtown buildings. And the creation of the historic district will complement the already existing Joseph W. Royer Arts and Architectural District as a tourist destination. The many fine examples of buildings in the downtown by noted Urbana architect Joseph Royer is very unique to Urbana. This proposal will create a new synergy for history, art, and architecture in the downtown. And if we are wise enough to capitalize it, we should do so with banners, plaques, and advertising, being proud of the downtown and what this district enables us to boast about. And really the last step in protecting the appearance of our downtown is to create a downtown design overlay district to provide guidelines for future new development downtown so that it might be generally in harmony with the existing buildings, which we are further embracing today by the creation of this Urbana Downtown Historic District. I think it's really important to consider that. The design guidelines would, again, not be mandatory, but they would give guidance to those individuals who want to do changes or build new buildings in the downtown, so that what we get, at least in mass and size and proportion, in the placement of windows, in some of the detailing, requiring some kind of ornamentation around the windows, would then make those buildings harmonize with our downtown rather than be at odds with it. So those are the things I think are really important, and I really appreciate your effort in making this possible.
Thank you, Dennis. All right, we have a motion and a second, and a last chance for discussion. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign. And that motion passes. Thank you all very much. All right, our last item for this evening is a discussion on our consolidated social service funding. We've got comments from the mayor and from grants manager Sheila Dodd, who just want to inform the council we're not looking to make any directive action, just get comments and have discussion on these pieces. I don't know, Diane, if you want to lead off, or Sheila, if you want to go first. Sheila?
Thank you. The consolidated social service funding, we did the process a little bit different this year. I was new, started in November, and kind of talked to different agencies, talked to the township, heard comments from council and other staff on the timing of things. And so we tried to take all of the negative and positive comments that we had heard and put into the process for this year. So we looked at the goals of the city council as well as the township and identified those as priorities as we looked at these consolidated social service applications. The township, or the team, consisted of the township, city staff, myself and Alyssa Jeji, city council member Mary Alice Wu, and Danielle Chenoweth. Once we identified the priorities, we created an application that would identify those and make it clear for agencies who wanted to apply. And then we held two different application processes. We explained our evaluation criteria during those, highlighted the questions that would be critical for them to pay attention to, because those would be things we would be looking at as we evaluated them. And then we opened the process up for 5 weeks of technical assistance. So during that time period, any agency that was interested in applying for funds could either go to the township or city staff and request any kind of technical assistance they needed. We got weekly questions that we sent out, a frequently asked questions list to anybody who had attended any of those meetings. So that really, my goal was that it would be an open, fair process, and that everybody would have access to the same information at the same time. So the applications were closed on April the 8th, I believe. And at that time, once they came into Urbana, then we distributed them to the rest of the team to evaluate. There were 46 agencies that attended the workshops, and of those, 34 submitted applications. Of those applications, there was requests from 45 different programs for a total funding request of $820,000. So a learning opportunity for us was next year we will not leave that an open opportunity for funding, because our total pool was not near that amount. So once they came in, each individual on the team evaluated the applications, and then we came back together and discussed each application individually and what we saw the merits of it were. So the things that we considered were the longevity of a program, the capacity of an agency to execute the grant project, organizations who had had poor performance in the past with using the funds or limited experience in managing grants were also not considered. Because the overall objective of the funding is to provide long-term support to extremely low-income residents, the capacity was analyzed considering sound financial health as determined through an agency's audit or financial statements. Their ability to support the program with other revenue resources. We did not want to be the only pot of money considered for whatever the program happened to be. And the capability to increase service to Urbana residents with this funding, because the goal, it is township money and city tax dollars, and we wanted to see that as much as possible Urbana residents were being served. The narratives in the applications guided our decision making as we reviewed them. We also decided this year that government or quasi-government organizations who have their own revenue resources and their own taxing bodies were not considered for funding. However, Champaign County Regional Plan Commission did put in an application for the homeless centralized intake system, and that is mandated by HUD. It's not funded by RPC, they're just the repository of it. So we did recommend that they fund that, since homeless is an issue that we're all very concerned about. So after a thorough review of all applications, the team proposed to fund 17 agencies and 18 programs. We tried to be a little bit creative. You know, some of the agencies were recommending that it be a fee for service to not exceed a certain amount. So for example, Meals on Wheels will reimburse Meals on Wheels for each Urbana resident that they serve up to a certain amount. And we'll work with the agencies to determine that, to have as fair a process as we can, but that will ensure that those funds really are serving Urbana residents. So the funding amounts range between $5,000 and $21,000. And we came in a little bit under the $225,000 that we anticipated the funding to be. There was one application that was incomplete. However, we've asked council, as you review these and you make your recommendations, to consider them. And that is the the Urbana Neighborhood Connection Center, because they are the only applicant that truly only serves Urbana kids. And so we don't want them to be left out of the funding cycle. They did apply for 2 programs. We are recommending that they be funded for their youth program, because the last staff had worked with them. They didn't have a place for the, what's the second agency? Tutoring system, right. So we'd like to work with Janice and have her come back and apply or work with us to get other federal funds, so that she can have a certified area for the kids to have that mentoring area. They don't have a second floor exit, so it's not really a safe place to have the mentoring. So that's kind of a brief overview of the applications. Once the process is complete and council makes their recommendations, we do plan to send individualized letters back to the agencies who weren't recommended for funding, to let them know what our process was. And then before we do this next year, so maybe August, September, I'd like to meet with council again to see what things you feel we should focus on and set priorities on, so that we can go into this, process much more well-informed.
Thanks, Sheila. Diane, did you want to make your comments
I
next?
think I'll wait until after council comments.
Okay. Dennis?
Yeah, so for some, you've made it a little bit easier on the council members who in the past have each one voted on all of the distributions that they wished to do according to what they felt after reviewing all the numerous applications. So we've had in the past these huge spreadsheets which every single council member contributed to and were correlated and then divided up. So now the recommendations are really being handled by maybe a more astute committee to evaluate them, and we are not asked to do that. But so there's something lost and something gained, and I'm not sure quite where we stand on that. And maybe you're saying that you'd like to have some feedback on that. But generally, I just wanted to say that I kind of appreciate. I did send an email to Alyssa Jage, and I don't know. Did you see that email? I didn't CC you on it, so
Okay, probably not then.
I assumed that maybe she would
What,
have a conversation with you.
yeah,
but-
what was it in reference to?
Well, it was really actually about the Janice Mitchell's programs.
Oh, right.
And you did sort of cover it. She was interested in getting 2 different programs supported, and as she would comment to us, not only did she develop it right in East Urbana, right a couple blocks from my home,
Yep.
Which practically is a miracle that that even got started, but then it was so strongly supported by the community. It's operating at a really high level, and supports all completely Urbana residents.
Right.
So I was disappointed, and she did comment to me that she was disappointed that the tutoring program for the Community Studies Center didn't get funded this year. So you've explained a little bit about why, and that's, my email was to elucidate why it couldn't get funded, and it sounded like partly it was because the room that she does it in, you consider not safe because it didn't have a second egress door, is that correct?
Correct. And then that may have changed since my last meetings with Janice on it, but there are other federal dollars that we can use to help her get that second floor to have a safe egress, and she can use that space for the program like she'd like to use.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be with these dollars because these are more programmatic, but there
Okay.
are funds available that we could help her with. I worked with Janice on the same problem when I was at Habitat and trying to find a way to help her get that space usable. I think it's important, but we also have to be safe.
I see. So really, it's a technical thing about that. Otherwise, she might have been funded for that as well, or
Yeah,
somehow,
potentially.
to some amount. All right. Well, really, that was my only real concern, and I want to support her, and I think she's doing a good job. And so thank you for being willing to work with her through that issue for the next funding year.
Thank you, Dennis. Other comments? Eric, go ahead.
I thought I remembered, but maybe my memory needs to be refreshed, that it was the sense of both the council and the township board that our total allocation would be $250,000. And can you refresh us on the process by which it declined to $225,000?
And Mary Alice, please correct me if my memory's wrong, because I've had some issues lately, but it was my understanding that Township wanted to set aside $25,000 to have this rapid response. So like the past year, when Courage Connection was undergoing some changes, they'd hope to use that money to help them along the way. Or I think when the United Way opened up the homeless shelter for families, they were able to utilize unencumbered funds for that type of thing. So they felt it was important to have that pot of money set aside to be utilized for a rapid response. So as we looked at these, that was kind of what we were looking at.
Mary Alice?
So I think one of the things that is nice, I actually was thinking about this last year, was to set aside a little bit of money because things happen at the local and the national level and the state level that are unpredictable. So the fact that we have something, Dennis, that was more of a technicality, so to speak, and the use of these funds is different. We've had other people who applied for a van. We've had other, or furniture or stuff, and that's not the use of these funds. That's not to say that there aren't other funds that could be tapped for different purposes. But that said, if something gets resolved at the second floor and we spent all the money, and the committee decided or the council decided, oh, well, now we want to be able to contribute for the second half of the year because now they've been able to resolve that, that gave us the opportunity. The other question that last time, Jerry, you had brought up was Courage Connection and why we didn't fund them this time. I went back, and this might be lack of information, but what they had asked for was a housing coordinator. And I believe Danielle had talked about how that's kind of diminishing in terms of what they're doing at Courage Connection. And Sheila, maybe you have a better recollection of how that service is diminishing.
Yeah, they are, with the change of directors, the board is looking at kind of shrinking and going back to their original mission. And so it was my understanding that Danielle led us that they may not have that program even throughout the year. So they also received a large amount of money through the Continuum of Care to run that program if it does continue. So since we do have a limited pot, we knew they had that extra money. There are some concerns about them shrinking their mission back to their core services. That was one of the reasons why the main reasons why we didn't allocate to them.
Can I make a comment?
Carol?
Just to pick up on the thread of what Mary Alice was saying, which I think it is good to have some money that, for things as they come up, but to the extent that there are unallocated funds through this process, I think it would be useful for the council and the town board to designate the process by which those funds will become allocated.
I agree.
Yeah, I had that same thought as to, we were saying we were going to set them aside, but then we didn't establish any procedure for how they would get established, because obviously we've had a number of requests since our initial discussion of people who were not included or not awarded or not thought of or didn't complete an application and wanted to be considered, some of whom I think weren't in merit. So I think that's maybe a comment for again. But I do look forward to reviewing the process, because I had thoughts on that as well. But we could do that at a future time.
Sure.
Sheila, Sharice, no.
No.
Nope.
You just kind of covered it for me.
Okay. Anyone else? Diane, you want to throw yours in?
Sure, I'll throw in my 2 cents. First, I want to thank the committee who slogged through these applications. I think you've really tightened up the application process. You've got some good, sound grant evaluation criteria. You really created I think a process that has integrity and that's fair. And that's a big step forward compared to some of the previous years. And I love the idea of the fee-for-service. That really helps us hone in on serving Urbana residents. So my concerns, but I did have concerns with a couple of recommendations, and it goes to maintaining the integrity of the application process. The first is related to the recommendation for CU FAIR, CU Friends and Allies of Immigrants and Refugees. It's a first-time applicant. They requested a total of $40,000 for 3 separate programs. In each of those cases, the funding was 100% of the program budget, which is directly, I don't think that was I think that was something that your application evaluation criteria actually discouraged. And ultimately, the committee recommended funding at $15,000 for a volunteer coordinator. I don't want to, I deeply respect people working with CU FAIR, but I'm troubled from a public accountability perspective. One of the evaluation criteria is that an organization should demonstrate sound financial health and sound budgeting processes and financial processes. I don't think that was demonstrated. And they should have a long-term ability to maintain a new program, particularly a new program. I didn't see that demonstrated. And there were no other sources of revenue. So that was also troubling. The other thing that concerns me is that it's duplicative. It duplicates a lot of the activities of an organization that's been around for decades. The Refugee Center and CU FAIR are both located at the Public Health District, so they're literally almost next to each other in the same building. And while a new program was funded for CU FAIR, the Refugee Center had applied for just $8,000 and only got $5,000. So that troubled me at a time when the Refugee Center increased its service to Urbana citizens by 12% and serves over 2,000 individuals a year. So they have a demonstrated track record and accountability to the taxpaying who are supporting these grants. So I have made a recommendation in terms of where I think I'd like to go with this, but it all speaks to maintaining the fairness and integrity of this grant application process, and really to be fair to all the applicants. And I would really like to encourage CU FAIR to take some time to demonstrate financial accountability and the ability to collaborate with existing organizations. So I would focus on funding the Refugee Center and delete funding for CU FAIR for this year. And then my second area of concern was the fact that the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission's request for the Youth Assessment Center was not funded at all. We have funded them in the past. Apparently there was some misunderstanding about who was going to be funding YAC. The only money that comes from the city of Urbana is through the social service funds. It's not funded through the police department, and this is I think it's very important for the city to continue to demonstrate its commitment to this program. YAC is an alternative for youth who commit a minor crime. It's an alternative. It's a way to keep them out of the criminal justice system, and the best part about it is that it links kids and their families with services and resources. And, you know, if a kid is stealing a candy bar, is it because there's no food in the house? And that's the kind of thing you can find out if they go to the youth assessment center. You may not find that out if they're in the youth detention center. So that's the beauty of the youth assessment center. There's social workers there, other professionals who work with these kids, and referrals can come from teachers, from schools, from ministers, from law enforcement, from any variety of sources. But the bottom line is, just in the last year alone, they had 407 referrals. And those are kids that otherwise might have gone into the criminal justice system if they hadn't had a place to go. So I think it's really valuable and important for us to continue to support the Youth Assessment Center. And some of the money we save in the previous example, I would put toward funding YAC, and I'll make a specific recommendation for that as well.
Just a reminder, we're not looking for direction, council. We're just having discussion, comments to consider later date. Eric.
In general, I support or agree with the comments that the mayor has made. Over the last several days, I've had quite a few communications back and forth with people who are close to the situation with respect to services to immigrants. And the situation is pretty much, I agree with the mayor's assessment of the situation. In the CU Fair proposal, they stated that their relationship with the refugee center was that the refugee center referred clients to them. I don't think that's for services. I don't believe that is factual, and I think there needs to be, to consider CU Fair in the future, I think that they need to have memoranda of understanding with the existing agencies which have, well, with the Refugee Center, which has a great track record of longstanding, and with the Welcome Center, which looks like a really good thing and is working well with the entire community, and they've just got to fit into that, in my view, to be appropriate for funding by us.
Thank you, Eric. Any other comments from committee members? All right. Well, that was our last discussion item for the night. And if there's no further business anyone wants to bring forward, I'm going to call this meeting adjourned.